The morning we left for vacation, my husband's phone revealed the truth. I woke before the sun that morning. The house still wrapped in a soft blue hush that usually made me feel calm, but not today. I stood in the kitchen with my hands around a warm mug, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and trying to settle the strange tightness in my chest. We were supposed to be leaving for vacation in a couple of hours, yet something in the quiet felt heavier than usual. As I moved through the hallway, the floorboards creaked under my slippers, and the sound felt louder than it should have been. I paused at the doorway of our bedroom, watching my husband pack the last of his things with quick, clipped movements. His shoulders were tense, and he kept glancing at the phone on the nightstand as if expecting it to come alive. The small lamp beside him cast a warm circle of light, but his expression looked colder than the room. I told myself he was just stressed about the long drive ahead, but the thought didn't settle anything inside me. I walked in slowly, pretending to look for my own charger, though my eyes kept drifting to his guarded posture. The air smelled faintly of detergent and his aftershave, a scent that usually comforted me, but today it felt unfamiliar. When he noticed me watching him, he offered a quick half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to respond with a light comment about hoping we didn't hit too much traffic, but my voice sounded thin even to me. He nodded without really looking up, slipping his phone into his pocket with a motion that felt too fast, too deliberate. The gesture hit me in a strange way, like he was closing a door I wasn't supposed to see behind. I felt a small prick of discomfort, but I swallowed it, reminding myself we had a long day ahead. In the kitchen, I double-checked our snacks, cooler, and the road trip playlist I had spent hours putting together. Normally, he would have leaned against the counter, teasing me about over-preparing, but today he barely stepped into the room. He hovered near the doorway instead, shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he was waiting for something. The smell of brewed coffee filled the room, warm and steady, but his presence felt restless. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he pretended to scroll through something unimportant. His fingers tapped the screen too quickly, almost nervously, and the faint reflection of the display lit his face in uneven flashes. Every few seconds he locked the phone, slipped it slightly behind his leg, then reopened it again. It was a subtle dance of secrecy, enough to make my stomach tighten in quiet confusion. I took a slow breath and started placing things into the tote bag we kept by the door, trying to keep my hands steady. The morning air drifting in through the cracked window was cool, carrying the faint smell of dew and freshly cut grass from the neighbor's yard. It should have made me feel grounded, but instead it reminded me how strangely distant he'd seemed lately. I kept wondering if this trip might help us reset, though doubt kept nudging at me. When he finally walked into the room, his footsteps were soft, but his energy prickled with impatience. He asked if I was almost ready, and though his tone was casual, his eyes darted briefly toward the pocket where his phone rested. I nodded, watching how he exhaled with relief, as if my answer solved a problem I didn't know about. The moment passed quickly, but it left a faint chill at the back of my neck. We carried our bags to the car in near silence, the gravel crunching under our shoes in small, uneven rhythms. The morning light was brighter now, washing the driveway in a pale gold that should have felt peaceful. Instead, each step felt strangely heavy, like I was walking toward something I couldn't name yet. When he opened the trunk, his phone buzzed against his leg, and I noticed the way his hand twitched toward it before he forced himself to ignore it. I closed the trunk gently, feeling the cool metal under my palm as I steadied myself. The morning looked ordinary around us, but inside I felt a quiet thrum of uncertainty. I tried to breathe slowly, hoping the drive would ease the knot in my stomach. I climbed into the passenger seat while he adjusted the mirrors, a habit he always insisted on before long drives. The leather was cool beneath my legs, and the faint scent of the air freshener, something like pine and citrus, floated between us. Normally, this was the part of the trip where he would crack a joke or turn on our favorite playlist, but the silence stretched thin and uneasy as he started the engine. We pulled out of the driveway, the morning light filtering through the trees and casting moving shadows across the dashboard. I watched the neighborhood roll past. The familiar lawns, the mailboxes, the small American flags some families kept up year-round. but none of it grounded me. He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead, jaw stiff. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the road and the soft click of the turn signal. I glanced at him, hoping to catch a bit of the old warmth in his expression, but his face was unreadable. When the phone in the cup holder buzzed, he startled slightly, then quickly flipped it face down. He muttered something about work deadlines, though we were supposed to be unplugging for the week. His answer felt thin, like paper stretched too far. I nodded, choosing not to push, though my heart tapped uneasily against my ribs. The highway appeared as we turned onto the on-ramp, a wide open stretch that usually made me feel free, like everything ahead was possible. But today the road felt long and uncertain. The early sun glinted off passing cars, creating fleeting flashes of light across the windshield. I tucked my hands into my lap, tracing small circles on the fabric of my jeans to steady myself. He reached for the radio, then hesitated, settling instead on silence again. We had taken this drive many times before, visiting family, heading to beaches, exploring new towns on long weekends. Those trips had always felt full, like we were a team sharing the world together piece by piece. But now I felt like a passenger in a life I didn't fully recognize. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, not at traffic but at his phone behind it, like he was tracking something only he understood. Every so often, I noticed his fingers tapping the steering wheel, a quick, restless rhythm. I opened the window slightly, letting the cool breeze wash through the car and brush across my face. The fresh air helped a little, but it also carried the faint smell of asphalt and early morning exhaust, grounding me in a reality that didn't feel as steady as it used to. I told myself the tension was just pre-trip stress, that we'd settle into a groove once we got farther from home. Still, my eyes kept drifting toward his pocket whenever I saw the outline of his phone pulse faintly with another notification. He cleared his throat at one point, like he was about to say something, but then he didn't. He just tightened his grip on the wheel and stared ahead, the morning sun casting a harsh stripe across his cheek. I watched the way his chest lifted with each shallow breath, and the small twitch in his jaw when another buzz sounded from the cup holder. He pretended not to notice it, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. I turned my gaze to the horizon, trying to lose myself in the passing landscape. The fields were dipped in soft golden light, rows of crops stretching out in neat lines that made everything look orderly and calm. A few birds hovered above a fence line, their wings catching flecks of sunlight. But even those small, peaceful scenes couldn't shake the feeling that something between us was shifting quietly, like sand moving under the surface. We drove another mile before I asked if he wanted me to take over driving later. His response was quick and dismissive. He said he was fine, didn't mind doing most of it. But the way he said it felt too sharp, like he needed control of the car, the phone, the whole morning. I nodded anyway, folding my hands together to keep from fidgeting. The air inside the car felt warmer now, not from the sun but from something unspoken between us. Another buzz from his phone made him flinch, so subtly most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I saw the brief tightening of his expression, the way his eyes narrowed before he smoothed his features again. He pushed the phone deeper into the cup holder, then changed his posture, sitting more rigidly. I felt my breath catch, though I forced myself to look out the window as if nothing had happened. We passed a familiar exit, and I found myself thinking of past trips where he would point out funny signs or comment on roadside attractions. His voice had once filled these rides, steady and warm, weaving small stories into the hours on the road. Now the silence felt like a thick fog settling between us, muting every instinct I had to reach out or ask what was wrong. I shifted in my seat, letting my fingers trail along the door handle as the hum of the tires continued beneath us. The sun was higher now, casting long rays that flickered through the trees and flashed across his face. I watched him blink against the light, his expression tightening for a moment before he relaxed again. Something in him felt guarded, as though the morning was a test he needed to get through. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warm air brush over my skin and listening to the steady rhythm of the road. I told myself this was just a quiet start, that the day might open up once we reached our first stop. But even as I breathed slowly, trying to steady the ripple of unease inside me, I couldn't ignore how different this car ride felt from all the ones that had come before. I used to believe that distance in a marriage arrived loudly, after big fights, after broken promises, after moments so sharp they carved themselves into memory. But looking back now, I realize ours crept in quietly, almost politely, slipping between us in places I didn't think to guard. It began long before that morning in the car, long before vacations and phone screens and all the things I would eventually discover. It began in the soft corners of our everyday life, in moments subtle enough that I mistook them for nothing at all. In the early years, we had been inseparable. We shared everything. Our dreams for the future, our worries about money, the tiny victories that made up ordinary weeks. I remembered those days clearly, the feel of our small apartment, the warm clutter of mismatched furniture, the way he would pull me close on the couch while we watched movies. The air always smelled faintly of coffee and the cheap candles we bought at the grocery store, and somehow that mix felt like home. There was a simplicity to those moments that I didn't realize would someday become rare. But slowly, the rhythm of our life began to shift. It started with longer hours at work, nothing unusual, or so I thought. He would come home later and later, offering explanations that sounded perfectly reasonable at the time. Deadlines, meetings, unexpected tasks. I accepted each one without question, telling myself that stress made people change their habits. I didn't want to be the kind of partner who assumed the worst, so I let it go. Each night, I waited for him with the TV playing softly in the background, trying not to feel disappointed when he walked through the door looking exhausted instead of eager. Sometimes, when he finally came home, he would collapse onto the couch and close his eyes like he couldn't bear another conversation. I would sit beside him, giving him space, convincing myself that being supportive meant staying quiet. The air between us felt different on those nights, heavier somehow. There were times when I reached for his hand, and he would squeeze gently before pulling away a little too quickly. I told myself his mind was somewhere else because of work, not because of me. The first real shift happened on a Saturday morning months before the vacation, when he announced that he had to go into the office unexpectedly. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was busy tying his shoes, focused on the laces like they needed his full attention. I asked if everything was okay, and he nodded quickly, almost too quickly. His response was crisp, rehearsed. I kissed him goodbye at the door, though the gesture felt slightly off, like I was leaning toward someone whose mind had already left the room. When he returned that afternoon, he smelled faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. I noticed it the moment he walked in, though he breezed past me with a tired smile before I could ask anything. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe he'd switched brands or used something at the office. It's funny how the mind protects itself, how it offers the easiest explanations first so you don't have to confront the harder ones. I didn't question him. I didn't want to. It was around this time that friends began to ask if everything was okay between us. Their voices carried gentle concern, the kind you use when you don't want to overstep but can't ignore the signs. I always replied that we were fine, just busy. I even laughed sometimes, brushing off the idea that something might be wrong. But deep inside, a small discomfort was beginning to settle, like a pebble in a shoe. Easy to ignore at first, harder with every step. As weeks passed, the distance grew in ways I couldn't quite articulate. He started keeping his phone closer, turning the screen away when I walked by. I told myself it was because of work, that he didn't want clients' information displayed casually. But there were small inconsistencies, tiny things that didn't add up. He would come home claiming he was delayed by traffic on nights when the roads were clear. He'd smell faintly of beer even when he said he skipped after-work drinks. They were small details, barely noticeable unless you were someone who paid attention. And I did pay attention, even if I pretended not to. I watched how his eyes lingered elsewhere when we talked, how his smile didn't quite reach the corners the way it used to. I noticed the way he'd step into another room to take calls, speaking in a voice just quiet enough that I couldn't make out the words. He'd return a few minutes later with a bright expression, like he'd switched masks on the way back in. I never questioned him directly. Instead, I swallowed each uneasy feeling and tucked it somewhere deep, hoping it would fade. At night, I would lie awake beside him, listening to the soft rise and fall of his breath, feeling the warmth of his body just inches from mine. It should have been comforting, but instead it made the distance more noticeable. It was an ache I couldn't name, a mismatch between proximity and connection. Sometimes I would roll onto my side and watch the glow of the streetlights seep through the curtains, wishing I understood what was happening between us. I told myself we just needed time, a break, a reset, something to shake us out of the fog we seemed to be drifting through. That was part of why I had looked forward to the vacation so much. I imagined open roads and shared meals and long walks on quiet paths. I imagined us rediscovering each other the way we used to, piece by piece. I didn't know then how far gone some things already were. But in those months leading up to the trip, I still held on to hope. Even as the first cracks quietly formed beneath the surface, that I remember the months leading up to the trip as a strange blur of mixed signals. Moments that should have felt ordinary but instead carried a faint edge I couldn't ignore. Little things began standing out more clearly, like how he'd grown quieter at dinner or how he'd shift in his seat whenever his phone buzzed. These details built up gradually, layering themselves into a feeling I struggled to name. There was one evening in particular that lingered in my mind. We were sitting on the couch, a muted documentary flickering on the screen, while the soft lamplight settled over the room. He scrolled through his phone with a focus that felt strangely guarded. I asked if he wanted to pick a different show, something lighter, and he answered without looking up. His voice sounded distant, almost hollow. At the time, I convinced myself we were simply drifting through a stressful season. Work had been overwhelming for both of us, and I assumed his silence was a byproduct of exhaustion. Still, something about the way he angled his body away from me left a small sting. Moments like that had become more frequent. Quiet exchanges, unfinished conversations, and long pauses that used to be filled with warmth. One Saturday afternoon, we drove to a local market we often visited. The air carried the scent of roasted nuts and freshly baked bread, and people moved around us in gentle, unhurried rhythms. Yet even in such a familiar place, I felt his attention slipping elsewhere. He lingered near a display, checking his phone with a look that wasn't quite nervous but definitely tense. When I walked over, he pocketed it too quickly. I tried brushing it off, telling myself it was nothing. But the more I dismissed, the heavier everything felt. Little behaviors built upon one another. Forgotten plans, missed texts, quick explanations that didn't match his expressions. There were times when he would laugh at something on his phone but close the app the moment I looked his way. Each instance felt like a drop of cold water down my spine. As the vacation approached, I found myself hoping it might help us reconnect. We'd both been stretched thin, and the idea of stepping away from routines offered a small thread of comfort. I pictured long walks by the water, shared meals, maybe even a deeper conversation about how distant things had felt. In my mind, the trip became a kind of reset button we desperately needed. But the week before we left, the tension seemed to thicken. He came home late twice, offering brisk explanations that faltered under even the smallest scrutiny. I wasn't trying to catch him in a lie. I just wanted reassurance, something to settle the unease that had grown inside me. Instead, he appeared more preoccupied, like his attention lived somewhere I couldn't reach. There was a moment 3 days before we left that unsettled me more than I expected. We were in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the space. His phone buzzed on the counter, and he moved toward it with a speed that felt almost startled. When he saw me watching, he forced an easy smile, the kind that didn't match the tension in his eyes. I asked if everything was okay, keeping my tone light. He said it was just someone from work, nothing important. The answer was simple, but the way he said it, too smooth, too prepared, made my chest tighten. I nodded, pretending to accept it, though the moment replayed in my mind long after we turned in for the night. Something didn't feel right, even if I couldn't articulate why. In the days that followed, I noticed myself becoming more observant, watching small details I used to overlook. The way he hesitated before answering certain messages. The way he angled his phone downward. The new password he'd added to his lock screen without mentioning it. These might have been harmless habits, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to examine closely. Even simple conversations felt strained. When I asked about the vacation itinerary, He responded with unusually clipped answers, as though distracted by something he refused to name. His phone remained a constant presence, always within reach, always face down. I wondered when that shift had happened, when he stopped leaving it casually around the house, when he began guarding it like a secret. On the night before we packed, I lay awake longer than I expected, listening to the quiet creaks of the house settling. He slept beside me, breathing steady and deep, his body turned away. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of questions I didn't know how to ask. The room felt cool, but a warm ache sat just beneath my ribs, stubborn and persistent. By the time we began preparing our bags the next morning, a sense of heaviness had already settled into my chest. I moved through the motions, folding clothes, gathering toiletries, checking lists, while trying to shake the feeling that something significant was shifting beneath the surface of our lives. Even then, I hoped the break might change things. I hoped the space would bring us back to ourselves. But deep down, I sensed that whatever distance had grown between us wasn't temporary anymore. It was rooted, settled, and quietly reshaping the ground beneath our marriage. In the week before we left for vacation, I noticed myself clinging to small moments of normalcy, as if they could anchor me to the version of us I still wanted to believe in. I tried cooking his favorite meals, hoping the familiar scents and warm kitchen air might draw him back into the space we once shared so easily. Sometimes he complimented the food, but his praise felt automatic, like he was checking off a box rather than connecting with me. It was subtle, but the subtle things were the ones that stayed with me the longest. One evening, I made a dish he used to rave about. Something simple, a creamy pasta that always reminded us of our early days together. The aroma filled the house, rich and comforting, and for a moment I felt a small surge of hope. When he walked in, he smiled politely, but his eyes moved quickly toward his buzzing phone. He barely took a few bites before saying he wasn't very hungry, though he insisted it was delicious. His fork clinked softly against the plate as he pushed the food around without finishing it. Later that night, I found myself replaying the way he kept glancing toward the hallway where he had left his phone charging. He excused himself twice to check on something work-related, though the house was quiet and the hour was late. Each time he returned, his expression seemed slightly more tense, like he was juggling something he couldn't quite manage. I pretended not to notice, but inside, the uneasiness had become a steady hum. Another moment stood out to me, one that seemed insignificant on the surface. We were folding laundry together, a chore we often turned into light conversation. But this time he barely spoke. He folded shirts with mechanical movements, stacking them in careful, precise piles. His phone was on the dresser, screen down, but I saw the faint glow each time a notification came in. He didn't touch it. He didn't even glance, but the tightening around his mouth told me he wanted to. I tried making small talk, asking about his day, but he gave clipped answers that ended quickly. It wasn't anger. It was something else, a quiet withdrawal. I found myself watching his hands, noticing how he moved faster whenever he was uncomfortable. When I asked if he was looking forward to the trip, he nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and said it would be good to get away. The way he said it made my stomach twist with a feeling I didn't want to name. 2 days before our departure, I woke early and found him already downstairs, sitting at the dining table with his laptop open. The room was dim except for the screen's cool light reflecting off his face. He looked startled when he saw me, snapping the laptop shut with a force that startled even him. He laughed it off, saying he was just double-checking some emails before vacation. I tried to smile back, but the explanation felt thin, like a thread pulled too tight. I poured myself coffee, listening to the soft drip of the brew. The quiet between us felt different that morning, heavier, as if we both sensed something shifting even if neither of us said it out loud. When he left the room to take a call, I stared at the mug in my hands, watching the steam curl upward in slow spirals. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I didn't understand yet. That afternoon, I suggested we take a walk, hoping the fresh air might ease the atmosphere. The neighborhood was calm, the sky a soft blue with streaks of pale clouds stretching across it. Leaves rustled gently as a mild breeze passed through the trees. He walked beside me but felt miles away, responding only when I spoke first. His eyes drifted often, scanning the surroundings or focusing on nothing at all. I could feel the gap between us widening with each step. As we headed back home, I watched him unlock his phone the moment we crossed the threshold. His thumbs moved quickly, his expression tightening with each message he read. I pretended to hang up my jacket slowly, giving myself time to observe without looking like I was staring. His shoulders tensed before he slipped the phone into his pocket and looked up with a forced smile. It was a small smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. The night before we left, I tried one more time to bridge the distance. We sat on the couch, the soft glow from a lamp warming the room. I mentioned how excited I was for us to have some time together. He nodded, offered a quiet "me too," and then immediately reached for his phone again. I felt the words sink inside me, heavy and shapeless. Later, as I lay in bed, I listened to him move around in the bathroom, opening drawers and running water. His footsteps sounded brisk, almost anxious, and each sound echoed in the stillness of the room. When he finally slid into bed, he kept a few inches farther away than usual. I felt the space like a cold draft. I stared at the shadows on the ceiling, trying to steady my breath. I told myself the vacation would help. I told myself this wasn't something bigger. But deep down, a quiet ache had already settled inside me. A feeling I couldn't dismiss no matter how hard I tried. Outside, the morning air cooled my skin, sharpening my awareness. Birds called distantly yet failed to soften the mood forming. He loaded bags quickly, avoiding conversation with unusual determination today. His shoulders hunched slightly, signaling thoughts weighing heavier than normal. I watched his movements, noting reactions he hid from me. The trunk door slammed sharply, echoing louder than expected nearby. I steadied my breathing, unsure why fear bloomed inside suddenly. He muttered quietly, though words blended into the morning wind. I stepped closer, hoping proximity might reveal something hidden or... Still, he remained distant, locked within thoughts he refused sharing. When he opened the car door, his hesitation was clear. He lingered momentarily, scanning surroundings as though expecting interruption nearby. I felt tension deepening, stretching thin between us without explanation. The car's interior smelled faintly of fabric cleaner from yesterday. I settled slowly into my seat, waiting for calm today. He avoided looking at me, focusing instead on adjusting mirrors. His jaw flexed subtly, revealing strain he tried hiding inside. I clasped my hands together, grounding myself before speaking anything. The tension simmered, narrowing the space between breaths and thoughts. I wondered if truth waited quietly, already forming within shadows. The engine started smoothly, though unease vibrated beneath its hum. I stared out the window, watching neighbors begin their routines. A cool breeze filtered inside, carrying scents of and pavement. My heart thudded heavier, matching the rhythm of traffic sounds. He shifted gears abruptly, revealing nerves he tried keeping control. I noticed his knuckles whitening while gripping the steering wheel. The car rolled forward, carrying both dread and unanswered questions. I shifted my posture, trying calming breaths despite persistent worry. The morning stretched, pulling time longer than usual moments. I waited silently, sensing truth nearing though hidden from reach. As we left the driveway, shadows shifted across the lawn. The movement unsettled me even though nothing unusual appeared. His eyes flicked toward the mirror repeatedly, watching something unseen. I noted the pattern, feeling suspicion rise steadily within me. My breath caught briefly when he tightened his grip again. Leaves rustled beside us, though the breeze felt incredibly faint. The noise almost mirrored the restlessness stirring inside my chest. He exhaled sharply, as if resetting himself without speaking anything. I folded my hands tighter, grounding tension beneath stillness deliberately. The car rolled onward, yet something between us remained unmoving. Streetlights dimmed gradually as morning brightened across the neighborhood. Warm tones spread slowly, contrasting sharply with my growing unease. He leaned forward slightly, studying the road with strict focus. Each motion suggested effort rather than simple habit or comfort. I watched the side of his face, noting stiffness around features. The tension sharpened angles normally softened by relaxed weekend mornings. A small sigh escaped him, barely audible over the engine. It carried heaviness that didn't match any known concern. I catalogued it quietly, unsure why the detail mattered. Still, the moment deepened questions already forming beneath my calm exterior. Traffic built gently as more drivers joined the road. Engines hummed around us, creating a low chorus surrounding the car. He seemed more alert than usual for early morning travel. His shoulders tensed whenever another vehicle approached too quickly. I noticed every reaction, collecting details carefully without breaking silence. The pattern grew clearer, shaped by something weighing heavily. I pressed my knee lightly against the seat frame for grounding. My throat tightened whenever his attention drifted toward his pocket. The movement repeated, subtle yet consistent in its urgency. I sensed meaning there, though the truth remained painfully incomplete. We passed the grocery store where we usually stopped together. Today he glanced away, avoiding the storefront completely without comment. The avoidance felt sharp, like he feared familiarity exposing something. I studied the dashboard reflection, catching hints of his expression. His eyes narrowed briefly, betraying thoughts he held privately inside. My pulse quickened again, syncing with the rhythm of passing signs. The world outside blurred slightly as nerves crept upward. I shifted my gaze forward, steadying myself through measured breaths. His silence grew heavier, thickening the already fragile atmosphere. Still, I waited quietly, letting observations settle where words refused. The morning opened wider as we reached the highway entrance. Traffic accelerated, blending sound and motion in a steady rush. He merged carefully, yet tension returned instantly after maneuvering safely. His posture stiffened again, revealing stress he failed masking today. I kept still, sensing distance widening despite sharing the small space. My pulse fluttered whenever his phone vibrated faintly beside him. The sound cut sharply through the hum, tightening something within me. He ignored it completely, though avoidance carried weight unmistakably now. I swallowed hard, though emotion rose higher than simple confusion. The day continued forward, yet truth hovered somewhere just beyond. The vibration came again, softer this time, but still enough to unsettle the air around us. I watched the faint tremor where his phone sat wedged between the cup holders. He didn't reach for it, not even to silence the alert. Instead, he pressed his lips together, focusing on the road too intensely. My breath felt tight, caught somewhere between my ribs. I folded my hands in my lap, pretending I wasn't watching. But the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. His eyes flicked toward the device for a fraction of a second, just long enough to reveal something he didn't want known. Another notification rolled through, a small buzz that seemed louder than it should have been. He shifted in his seat, a twitch of discomfort passing through his posture. The morning sun hit the edge of the screen, making it briefly illuminate despite being locked. I noticed how he angled the phone slightly away from me, almost too subtly to catch. My stomach coiled in response, a slow winding sensation I couldn't ignore. I turned my gaze out the window again, grounding myself in motion. The landscape blurred by, though my thoughts stayed painfully sharp inside. I tried to focus on the trip, something I'd once looked forward to. The idea of a week away had felt like a deep breath waiting to be taken. Now, the air tasted metallic, heavy with uncertainty. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel, an anxious rhythm repeating without pause. I watched the pattern, recognizing it as something he did when hiding worry. The hum of the tires filled the silence, stretching it across the space between us. I shifted slightly in my seat, feeling the upholstery press against my back. Still, the phone remained untouched, glowing faintly with unanswered demands. His breathing changed, growing shallow as another vibration rippled through the console. The sound seemed to strike him, though he still refused to acknowledge it. His jawline tightened again, carving tension into his expression. I studied the way his thumb brushed nervously against the steering wheel. That small movement said more than any confession might have. I felt my pulse climb, a slow, rising throb beneath my skin. The urge to ask what was going on brushed the edge of my thoughts. Instead, I swallowed the question and kept still, letting the moment gather weight all on its own. The car's interior warmed as the sun climbed higher, filling the space with brightness that contrasted sharply with his mood. Sweat gathered lightly at his temple, something he wiped quickly as if embarrassed. I shifted the vent toward myself, feeling cool air hit my cheeks. He glanced at me then, a quick and brittle motion. His eyes held something cautious, something measured. It wasn't guilt exactly, more like anticipation laced with fear. Another vibration sounded, shorter this time, like a withheld breath. He ignored it again, though the strain in his knuckles deepened. I sensed the truth drawing closer, even if I didn't know its shape. He finally reached for the volume dial, turning the radio up just enough to mask the sounds he didn't want heard. Music filled the car in soft waves, but it only amplified my unease. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, noticing the stiffness in his upper arms. He kept readjusting his grip, like he couldn't find a comfortable position. My chest tightened again, that quiet, instinctive warning returning. I rubbed my thumb slowly across my palm to steady myself. His phone vibrated beneath the music, faint but unmistakable. My breath caught, he felt it too, though he pretended otherwise. We passed mile markers I barely registered, each one slipping behind us like unnoticed minutes. The farther we drove, the more the silence took on a different weight. Not peaceful but suspended, as if waiting for something to break. His shoulders curled inward just slightly, a defensive posture I'd seen during stressful conversations. I lowered the window a crack, letting in fresh air tinged with highway dust. The breeze brushed across my face, grounding me for a moment. Still, my eyes kept drifting back to that unmoving phone, each vibration threading deeper into the growing disquiet between us. At the next stretch of open road, he adjusted his phone's position again, almost unnoticeably, tucking it farther down into the console's shadow. The gesture was small yet deliberate, a quiet attempt to hide something without drawing attention. But I'd already noticed too much. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears, a slow, steady drum of realization forming. I kept my gaze forward, pretending not to track his every move. The air between us felt stretched thin, nearly breakable. Another vibration fluttered through the space, softer but undeniable. And without a word exchanged, I felt a shift inside myself. An awareness that something in our marriage had begun to tilt. The next few miles passed in uneasy quiet, the kind that seemed to expand with every small vibration from his phone. I kept my gaze fixed on the open road ahead, though my thoughts drifted in circles. Curiosity tugged at me, not sharp or panicked yet, but steady and persistent. It wasn't a dramatic suspicion, just a quiet need to understand why he suddenly felt like someone sitting several inches farther away than before. The air around us carried a strange stillness, like the world was waiting for something to shift. I felt that tension gather inside me, quiet but certain. I told myself more than once that I might be imagining things. People get stressed before trips. People act off sometimes without any real reason. But the way he held himself, too rigid, too careful, didn't match harmless stress. He kept adjusting the rearview mirror even though nothing behind us had changed. Every time he reached for it, his elbow brushed the console, and his eyes flicked downward. That tiny motion repeated enough times that it grew into a pattern I couldn't ignore. My chest felt tight as I watched the subtle choreography of avoidance he didn't realize he was performing. I tried distracting myself by scrolling through my own phone, pretending to check the weather at our destination or look at the route ahead. But my mind wasn't following any of it. Every few seconds, I heard the faint thrum of another notification, and each one tightened something inside me. The sunlight flickered across the dashboard, catching small specks of dust in the air. I focused on those floating particles, grounding myself in something simple. Still, my attention inevitably drifted back to the phone. He kept tucked away like a fragile secret he hoped wouldn't break open. He cleared his throat once, a quick, strained sound that didn't match anything happening around us. His grip on the steering wheel tightened again, knuckles standing out pale and tense. I watched the shift in his posture, every movement sharper than necessary. The radio played quietly, but he seemed disconnected from it, like he was hearing something else entirely. I wondered if he was waiting for a particular message, or if he feared the next one. That thought lingered uncomfortably, sliding into the back of my mind where it refused to soften. My heart settled into a heavier rhythm. The phone vibrated again, longer this time, like someone was calling instead of texting. His entire body stiffened. He exhaled sharply through his nose but made no move to reach for it. The call stopped after a few seconds, leaving a strange silence in its wake. I felt a wave of cold move through me, subtle but undeniable. Calls weren't casual. Calls weren't nothing. I kept my face neutral, staring ahead at the stretch of highway curving toward a patch of trees. But inside, something unsettled began to grow roots. I could sense the truth drifting at the edges of my awareness. He finally muttered something about traffic, though the road ahead was nearly empty. I nodded quietly, not trusting myself to respond without revealing what I felt rising inside me. He ran his fingers through his hair, a restless gesture that usually meant he was hiding stress. I watched the movement without turning my head, absorbing every detail. His tense jaw, the tremor in his exhale, the quick dart of his eyes toward the console again. He looked like someone carrying a weight he didn't want seen. And the more I noticed, the more the puzzle pieces began aligning, even if I didn't want them to. I found myself replaying the morning in my mind, the way he hovered near doorways, the way he angled his body away, the way he pocketed his phone like it held something that could burn. The signs felt clearer now, threaded together into a quiet message my instincts kept whispering. I shifted in my seat, feeling the seatbelt press more firmly against my chest as I inhaled deeply. My hands felt cool, fingertips brushing the edge of the window frame. I wasn't searching for drama or betrayal. I simply needed to understand why this moment felt like standing at the edge of something changing. Another alert pulsed from the console, almost timid in its small vibration. He didn't look at me, not even out of the corner of his eye. That avoidance, more than anything else, pressed a slow ache against my ribs. The car moved steadily down the highway, but inside, the distance between us stretched quietly. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask. Instead, I let the realization settle deeper, like a slow dawn warming the horizon. Curiosity wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was the growing understanding that something in our life had started shifting long before this drive began. We stopped at a rest area to stretch our legs, the car idling quietly in the morning sun. I stepped out, inhaling the sharp scent of asphalt and dew-covered grass. He lingered beside the vehicle, adjusting his backpack but keeping his phone tucked firmly in his hand. The way he shifted constantly, unable to relax fully, made my stomach tighten. Something in him felt tethered to that small device in a way that went beyond habit. I told myself it was still work, still routine, but every subtle gesture chipped away at my certainty, leaving an uneasy edge behind. I walked toward the picnic tables, trying to focus on the feel of the rough wood beneath my palms. The air was crisp, carrying faint traces of nearby trees and passing cars. I glanced back and noticed him fidgeting near the car, hands hovering over the phone as if it contained a ticking clock only he could hear. The tension radiating from him was subtle but unmistakable. My chest constricted with a sense I couldn't yet define. Something unspoken pressed against the air between us, and I realized I couldn't simply let it go without paying attention. He finally came over, walking with careful steps that didn't match the casual pace of the area around us. I tried initiating small talk, commenting on the sun warming the benches and the smell of fresh air. He nodded, murmuring responses that felt clipped and mechanical. I noticed how his fingers drummed lightly against his pocket, a subconscious rhythm that matched the vibrations of his phone moments ago. His eyes flicked down twice, then back up, scanning my reaction. I realized then that something important was happening in silence, and I felt a pull toward uncovering it, even if I wasn't ready for the answer. We returned to the car, the engine humming softly as I buckled my seatbelt. He leaned over to check the map app on his phone, hands shaking ever so slightly. My heart caught at the sight, and I felt the first true pang of suspicion sharpen into focus. Something he had been hiding had begun to reveal itself, though I still didn't know what. I tried to breathe steadily, grounding myself against the rising tide of unease. The phone lay between us, innocuous yet undeniably charged with secrets. I felt a quiet urge to understand what it held before we drove any further. As the car rolled onto the highway again, I observed him carefully. His attention was fragmented, one part on the road, one part on the phone he kept out of sight. The tension in his shoulders, the shallow breaths, the way he adjusted the mirror repeatedly. It all began to form a pattern I could no longer ignore. My curiosity edged toward a kind of necessity, a quiet insistence that I needed to see what he was hiding. Each passing mile made it harder to dismiss the signals my mind had been tracking for weeks. When he reached for the console again, I realized I couldn't look away. My body tensed, every sense alert to his smallest movements. The phone slid slightly, the screen catching a sliver of sunlight. Something flickered there, a brief image I almost didn't see. My pulse quickened, a slow, steady drum in my ears. I didn't speak. I didn't move. But the knowledge that something was off settled into the pit of my stomach. I realized the distance we had been living with was no longer invisible. It was right there in plain view, small and insistent. I tried to focus on the scenery outside. Passing trees, stretches of road, distant signs. But my mind kept returning to the phone. Every vibration, every small movement he made, now carried weight I couldn't ignore. I felt my hands curl in my lap, fingers brushing the fabric of my jeans as I tried to steady myself. The realization that he had been guarding something so closely brought a sharp, quiet ache. I wanted to confront it, but I also feared the confirmation of what I already suspected. Every mile forward felt heavier than the last. By the time we passed the next exit, a sinking certainty had begun to settle over me. I understood that the phone wasn't just a phone. It was a vessel for secrets, for truths he had hidden carefully. The weight of that understanding pressed against me silently, forming a slow, burning need to uncover what he had been keeping from me. I stared straight ahead, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to appear calm. But inside, I felt the first tangible glimpse of the betrayal that had been forming quietly, patiently all this time. The next vibration came while we were driving through a quiet stretch of highway, the kind where the trees close in on either side and the world feels slowed. He flinched slightly, though he didn't glance down. My pulse quickened at the motion, my senses heightening in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a pressing need to understand. I felt every muscle in my body tighten, as if anticipating something I hadn't yet seen. The car hummed steadily beneath us, but inside, tension had replaced the calm I'd hoped the morning would bring. I watched him subtly adjust his grip on the wheel, thumb brushing the edge of his phone tucked in the console. It was an almost imperceptible motion, but I caught it immediately. The light from the sun reflected briefly across the device, illuminating a snippet of text before he moved it away. My stomach lurched. The words were fleeting, almost ghost-like, but enough to make me pause. I couldn't read them fully, yet the mere glimpse pressed on my mind. Something private had crossed into my awareness. I felt a strange mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief settle quietly in my chest. The rest of the drive continued with an uneasy rhythm. He drove steadily, though his posture was rigid, eyes narrowing ever so slightly with each passing mile. My own hands clenched in my lap, trying to keep from trembling. I wanted to ask, to demand, but I also felt the weight of the moment. Something fragile was hiding in plain sight, and I wasn't ready for confrontation. Every vibration, every subtle flicker of the screen, felt like a signal I could no longer ignore. I tried to focus on the landscape passing by, but my mind kept returning to the image I had glimpsed. We passed a small rest stop, and I felt the urge to pull over. Not for coffee or a bathroom break, but to process what was beginning to surface. He kept the phone close, fingers drumming lightly against it when a new notification appeared. That gentle tapping, almost rhythmic, carried more weight than words. I realized then that his attention wasn't divided, it was controlled, deliberate. Something he was hiding demanded constant vigilance. My chest tightened as I considered the implications. It wasn't a simple secret. It was something ongoing, carefully managed, and I was only beginning to glimpse the edges. I tried shifting my thoughts elsewhere, imagining the week ahead, thinking of the hotel we would reach in a few hours, picturing warm beds and quiet nights. But none of it held. The pull of the phone, of the hidden truth it contained, anchored itself firmly in my mind. I felt the weight of unspoken words between us, a tension that thickened with every mile. The landscape blurred outside the window, but inside, every heartbeat counted. I realized that the vacation we had looked forward to might not be a reset at all. It might become a confrontation we hadn't yet named. A sudden glance revealed more than I intended. He shifted, the light catching the phone's screen again, and I caught a brief glimpse of a name I didn't recognize. My throat went dry, and my pulse surged. The pattern of secrecy became undeniable. The constant vigilance, the hidden notifications, the small movements designed to shield his actions from me. A quiet certainty settled over me. This wasn't a harmless lapse in judgment or a temporary distraction. There was something he had been protecting, and it had now touched the edges of my awareness. The road stretched ahead, straight and empty, as if giving space for the tension to settle fully. I stayed quiet, my hands folded tightly, absorbing the details my eyes had caught. Every subtle gesture of his revealed a careful choreography. Avoidance, vigilance, and concealment. I felt my emotions deepen, swelling in layers of confusion, hurt, and the first flickers of betrayal. There was a strange clarity in it, a recognition of what I had been sensing for months. The vacation, I realized, might become the first true test of what remained between us. By the time we passed the next mile marker, the awareness had settled fully in my chest. That single glimpse of a message had cracked open the careful veneer of our daily lives. I couldn't yet see the full truth, but the outline had formed. My heart throbbed with quiet urgency, my thoughts racing to understand what this meant for us. The car moved steadily, tires humming against the asphalt, while inside, a storm had begun to take shape. I stayed still, letting the realization sink, bracing myself for the truth I knew was coming. The vibration came again, sharper this time, and he flinched visibly, though he kept his eyes forward on the road. My chest tightened, a low thrum of panic rising beneath my ribs. The subtle gestures I had been noticing for weeks now felt amplified, undeniable. His grip on the wheel tightened, knuckles pale, and he shifted slightly in his seat as if bracing for something. I tried to steady my own breath, but my pulse raced with a growing sense of dread. Every movement he made felt intentional, calculated, hiding something I hadn't yet uncovered but knew existed. I felt my hands curl in my lap, fingers brushing against the edge of the seat, grounding myself in what I could touch. The road stretched ahead, long and straight, yet every mile seemed to thicken the air between us. His phone vibrated again, resting just out of reach but commanding his attention all the same. He exhaled sharply, a subtle sound that betrayed the tension he tried to mask. My stomach knotted as I realized that this wasn't just secrecy. It was urgency. Whatever was happening, I sensed it was now active, pressing against the calm we had tried to maintain. The highway blurred past as I struggled to contain my emotions. Every glance he gave the console, every small movement of his thumb, carried meaning I couldn't yet decode. I felt my pulse hammering, each beat a warning. I told myself to stay calm, to observe rather than react, but the awareness of impending revelation made my skin prickle. The steady hum of the engine seemed to pulse in tandem with the tension inside the car. I tried focusing on the trees passing, the distant sky stretching above us, but the vibrations from his phone drew my mind back every time. I shifted in my seat, trying to create distance without moving physically. My breathing became shallow, echoing the rise and fall of my growing panic. Every subtle twitch of his body now seemed magnified, every tiny flicker of expression carrying hidden meaning. I couldn't see the content of his messages, but I could feel the weight behind them. The car's interior felt smaller than usual, air thick with unspoken words. I realized I had been navigating a careful dance for months without knowing it. And that morning the rhythm had changed, turning into something urgent and unavoidable. The tension pressed heavier as he glanced toward the rearview mirror, then quickly away. He shifted in his seat again, this time brushing his fingers over the console with almost imperceptible urgency. Each motion suggested he was expecting something, anticipating a trigger that hadn't yet appeared. My pulse quickened with every subtle twitch. I tried to maintain a calm exterior, though the rising panic in my chest threatened to spill outward. The thought that he was hiding not just a secret but something active, something urgent, lodged in my mind and refused to loosen. Every vibration, every flicker of movement, tightened the knot forming in my stomach. I realized I was no longer observing neutrally. I was preparing myself for the revelation, bracing for the truth he had carefully concealed. The morning sun shifted across the dashboard, illuminating the faint sheen of sweat on his temple. His shoulders remained rigid, a silent testament to the tension coiled inside him. I could sense that each mile carried us closer not just to our destination but to a moment where nothing could remain hidden. The quiet panic inside me mirrored the nervous energy he radiated without realizing it. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, as if a single deep breath could anchor me to the present. The sound of the tires on the asphalt, normally comforting, felt mechanical, almost too loud. My focus narrowed entirely to him, to the slight quiver of his hand, to the subtle twitch of his jaw. Every instinct in me screamed that something significant was about to surface. I realized I had been waiting, consciously or not, for this moment for months, waiting to see what had quietly shifted between us, and now the anticipation made the air almost unbearable. As the next rest stop appeared in the distance, I felt a quiet panic settle fully in my chest. My mind raced through every small gesture I had witnessed. The phone always close, the flashes of tension, the guarded movements. I knew the truth was somewhere between those vibrations and the unread messages. The realization pressed against me, heavy and undeniable. I braced myself mentally, understanding that the calm we had been clinging to had evaporated. Whatever lay ahead on the screen, on that small device, was about to change everything I had trusted. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, preparing me for the confrontation I knew was coming. The moment came quietly, almost casually, as if the universe waited until we were miles from distraction to deliver it. His phone lit up again, a soft glow that reflected in his eyes. This time he didn't shield it. I noticed the hesitation in his grip, the fraction of a second when he considered hiding it and chose not to. That tiny pause, longer than any previous movement, carried more weight than words. My stomach knotted, a mixture of dread and anticipation tightening my chest. Something in me braced for the revelation that had been building for weeks, growing impossible to ignore. He finally glanced down at the screen, and my heart sank as fragments of messages became visible. Names I didn't recognize, conversations I couldn't comprehend fully, notifications stacked carefully, deliberately, like a trail of breadcrumbs hidden from me. I wasn't meant to see this, not now, not ever, but the chance alone was enough to shift everything. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, tightening as I absorbed what I could. The air inside the car felt dense, heavy with all the words unspoken between us. The phone wasn't just a device. It was a map of secrets I had never imagined. At first, I struggled to process what I saw. My mind tried to rationalize, searching for excuses or alternate explanations. I told myself maybe it was work, maybe it was an old account, something meaningless, but every instinct screamed otherwise. The patterns, the timing, the hidden notifications, they all pointed to intentional concealment. The realization struck me like a wave. He had been hiding something personal, something ongoing, from the person who trusted him the most. Months of subtle avoidance, unexplained absences, sudden shifts in behavior. They suddenly made sense, though the clarity came with a sharp, painful sting. I felt a rush of emotion, a tangled mixture of betrayal, sadness, and disbelief. The quiet tension of the morning erupted into a slow-burning ache in my chest. Couldn't speak, not yet. My mind catalogued every tiny gesture he had made leading up to this point. The clenched jaw, the fidgeting, the constant attention to his phone. Each one became a testament to the hidden truth. I realized that the distance I had felt for months wasn't imagined. It had been real, created by actions meant to shield him from scrutiny and protect secrets he never intended me to uncover. He finally looked up, and our eyes met for the first time since that morning began. There was no anger, no immediate confession, just the tension of someone caught in a private storm. I sensed his awareness that the truth was no longer contained. He avoided my gaze quickly, and I understood then that confrontation wasn't necessary to know the reality. The evidence, the subtle patterns, the small signals, it all led to the same undeniable truth. The knowledge had weight now, solid and pressing, reshaping the space between us. The car felt smaller, the air heavier, the distance palpable and impossible to ignore. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, nails pressing faintly into my palms as I tried to steady my breathing. Shock and clarity collided, making my chest ache with an intensity one hadn't expected. I tried to focus on the road ahead, on the hum of the tires, on anything that might anchor me, but the truth settled firmly in my mind. Every missed call, every hidden text, every subtle avoidance, it all connected. Months of intuition and unease crystallized into certainty. I realized that the person I trusted most had been guarding something carefully, deliberately, and I now understood the weight of that secrecy fully. A sense of clarity mixed with sorrow began to wash over me. I could see the depth of the deception, and with it, a slow understanding of how carefully the truth had been hidden. My heart pounded, but a strange calm formed beneath the storm. I didn't need to accuse, didn't need confrontation yet. The facts were there. Seeing the hidden messages changed everything without a single word spoken. I felt a quiet resolve forming, a careful awareness that I would have to navigate what came next intelligently, with thought, precision, and a patience I hadn't realized I possessed. By the time we reached a clearing in the road, sunlight spilling across the dashboard, the truth had settled fully. I could no longer pretend the unease, the small signs, the quiet distance of recent months were meaningless. The phone, glowing softly in the console, had revealed everything I needed to know. The realization was painful, yes, but it also gave me power, the ability to process, to plan, and to approach the next steps with awareness. I inhaled slowly, feeling both grief and determination settle side by side. The truth was out, undeniable, and nothing would allow me to ignore it anymore. The moment after the truth revealed itself, the car felt smaller, heavier, almost suffocating. I sat frozen, watching him shift slightly in his seat, every motion careful, guarded. He didn't speak, but the tension radiated off him in waves I could feel. I realized I had known in fragments for months. The missed glances, the furtive gestures, the whispered excuses. They all pointed here. The truth was finally visible, undeniable, and I understood the depth of what had been hidden. My chest ached with a mix of shock and sorrow, the weight of betrayal pressing against me. I tried to keep my breathing even, to ground myself in the present. Every instinct screamed to lash out, to demand answers, to confront him immediately. But a deeper part of me understood that this wasn't a situation for reaction. It required patience, observation, and control. I could feel my hands pressing into my lap, steadying the tremor rising from within. The quiet hum of the engine, the soft vibration of tires on asphalt, filled the space around us, but inside, the storm had settled. I realized that processing this moment fully would take more than words or anger. He finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant, almost careful. I didn't respond, couldn't. I only observed as he attempted to explain, though each sentence felt measured, rehearsed, incomplete. The weight of unspoken truths lingered in the space between us. My mind catalogued every word, every pause, every gesture. The realization of his careful concealment settled deeper. I understood the patience, the secrecy, the small acts of avoidance. Each moment had been deliberate. Each hidden message, each guarded glance, now appeared as part of a pattern I could no longer ignore. I felt a strange clarity begin to emerge amid the ache in my chest. The betrayal was real, yes, but it also provided insight. I could see the structure of his secrecy, the patterns of his behavior, and the exact measures he took to ensure I remained unaware. This understanding didn't lessen the pain, but it gave me a sense of control. For the first time, I realized that my response could be deliberate, intelligent, and precise. I didn't have to act in anger or desperation. I could observe, plan, and navigate carefully. The car rolled on, tires humming steadily across the asphalt, as I allowed myself to catalog everything I had seen. Months of subtle gestures, the way he angled his phone, the careful avoidance of certain topics, the brief moments of tension that had always felt out of place. They all aligned now. The scope of what he had hidden became clear, not just as a single act but as an ongoing web of secrecy. My chest tightened, but within the ache, a quiet resolve began to form. I understood the betrayal, yes, but I also understood my capacity to respond thoughtfully. I thought back to mornings like this one, to the subtle signs I had ignored, rationalized, or brushed aside. Each small tension, each unexplained glance, each vibration I had felt in the car. It had been part of the same story. The truth wasn't sudden. It had grown slowly, imperceptibly, until it became impossible to ignore. And now that I had seen it, everything shifted. The foundation of our routine, the trust one had assumed, the shared space we occupied. All of it had changed in ways I could no longer pretend were intact. As the miles passed, a sense of measured determination took hold. I realized that confrontation alone wouldn't resolve the deeper issue. I didn't need a dramatic argument or an impulsive accusation. Instead, I could approach the situation with quiet awareness, careful strategy, and intelligence. The betrayal had been deliberate, yes, but so could my response be. I felt the beginnings of a plan, not born from anger but from clarity. I would reclaim the space and agency that had been eroded quietly over time. I would observe, I would wait, and I would act with purpose. By the time we neared the next exit, the storm of shock and disbelief had shifted into something quieter, something resolute. I understood the depth of the betrayal, and I understood my own power within the situation. The car felt still, the hum of tires against asphalt grounding me. I didn't need to act immediately. The truth had already changed everything. The quiet determination settling over me was not vengeful or hasty. It was precise, calculated, and deliberate. I had witnessed the betrayal fully, and now I could decide exactly how to respond, on my terms, with patience and clarity. After hours of processing, I realized that confrontation alone would not bring the resolution I needed. Anger had its place, but it was fleeting and often self-destructive. I wanted something lasting, something that would restore balance without putting me in harm's way. My mind, sharpened by months of observation, began mapping the steps I could take. Each subtle action he had taken to conceal the truth now inspired a measured approach of my own. I didn't need to shout or accuse. I needed strategy, intelligence, and patience. I could respond without violence, with precision, and it would be effective. The first step was reclaiming control over our shared environment. I began subtly adjusting routines, monitoring patterns, and creating moments of awareness that he wouldn't anticipate. Small changes, almost invisible to anyone else, allowed me to observe him closely without tipping my hand. I noted every subtle hesitation, every guarded glance, every flicker of tension that had been so familiar. Each observation became a tool informing the next step. By aligning my awareness with the patterns he had established, I built a map of his actions, timing, and secrets, without him ever realizing I was quietly regaining the upper hand. I also began documenting carefully, noting dates, times, and behaviors that confirmed the betrayal. Writing it down in real detail allowed me to process both emotionally and strategically. Each note was factual, precise, and unemotional. The act itself became empowering, a quiet assertion of agency. I could see the situation clearly, piece by piece, without clouded judgment. The betrayal was undeniable, but so was my ability to respond intelligently. By the time we reached our destination, I had a clear understanding of what had occurred, how it had been concealed, and how I could respond effectively without creating unnecessary chaos. Patience became my ally. I resisted the urge to confront him immediately, to demand answers in the heat of emotion. I knew that immediate action would play into his control, allowing him to deflect, excuse, or manipulate the situation further. Instead, I waited for opportunities that presented themselves naturally, moments when my intelligence and foresight could act quietly but powerfully. Observing him closely, I noted weak points in his careful routine, subtle vulnerabilities in his guard. These would become the moments where I could act decisively, not from anger, but from strategy. I also focused on protecting myself emotionally. Betrayal often leaves one vulnerable to panic, despair, or rash decisions. I created boundaries, both mental and physical, to maintain clarity. I reminded myself that the power lay not in reacting but in controlling my response. Each choice became deliberate, measured, and intentional. I no longer needed to guess or hope. My observations and documentation had provided clarity. I felt the quiet strength that comes from understanding fully and holding the next move intentionally. I was no longer the person caught unaware. I was calculating, aware, and ready. Small actions had immense impact. By subtly changing patterns in my own routine, I tested reactions, observed responses, and created clarity in our interactions. He would reveal himself in tiny, telling ways, through hesitation, misplaced attention, or subtle tension, without realizing he was exposing more than intended. Allowed these moments to accumulate, building evidence, insight, and confidence. The betrayal he had hidden with such care was now mirrored in my strategic observation. Each subtle step reinforced that I had regained control, quietly restoring balance without resorting to rash measures or confrontation. In private moments, I reflected on the depth of my own resilience. Months of subtle betrayal could have left me fragmented, vulnerable, or reactive. Instead, I had transformed observation and insight into strategy and clarity. The quiet justice I enacted was deliberate, intelligent, and satisfying precisely because it required patience and awareness. I didn't need dramatic scenes or public exposure. The power lay in understanding fully, in reclaiming control over the space he had manipulated, and in knowing that his actions would no longer escape scrutiny. My resolve deepened with every careful observation. By the time the week of vacation ended, I had established a new balance. The betrayal remained a shadow, but it no longer held control over my thoughts, my emotions, or my actions. I had transformed the situation into one of quiet empowerment. Every subtle act, every patient observation, every careful decision restored agency I had thought lost. The lesson was clear. Intelligence, patience, and careful action could be more powerful than confrontation or revenge born of anger. I had achieved justice quietly, effectively, and on my terms, proof that true strength often works silently, invisible but undeniable. After the quiet justice I had enacted, a sense of stillness settled over me. The tension that had gripped every mile of that fateful drive slowly loosened. I had witnessed betrayal, processed it fully, and responded with care and intelligence. Now, the aftermath demanded reflection. I sat with the reality of what had happened, considering the patterns, the choices, and the lessons embedded within the experience. The pain lingered, of course, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, a quiet clarity replaced the earlier panic. I understood both the depth of what I had endured and the strength I had discovered within myself. I thought about trust, the fragile thread that connects two people. Betrayal doesn't erase the past entirely, but it shifts the future, and that shift is where growth begins. I realized that part of healing was accepting what had happened without excusing it, and acknowledging the lessons it had taught. Awareness of human complexity, the masks people wear, and the patterns of deception became tools rather than burdens. I felt a deepened understanding of boundaries, of vigilance, and of the importance of protecting my own emotional space. The lesson wasn't only about him, it was about me. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding routine and reclaiming normalcy. The vacation, once tinged with anxiety, became a backdrop for calm reflection. I engaged in small acts that reaffirmed control, organizing our space, planning the next steps in life carefully, and returning to activities that grounded me. Every intentional choice reinforced a sense of agency, reminding me that the power I held over my own actions mattered more than the secrets anyone else had kept. The awareness that I could navigate complexity and respond with intelligence gave a sense of empowerment that felt both new and necessary. I also explored forgiveness, not in the sense of excusing the betrayal, but as a release of the hold it had over me. Carrying resentment is heavy and consuming, and I knew that lingering bitterness would only weaken the strength I had cultivated. I allowed myself to acknowledge anger and grief, to feel it fully, then transform it into resolve. Letting go of the emotional weight of the betrayal wasn't easy, but it was liberating. I realized that true closure comes not from revenge or confrontation, but from understanding, acceptance, and the conscious choice to move forward with awareness intact. Reflection extended to my relationships with others. I recognized the value of observation, intuition, and communication in building trust, and the importance of boundaries that protect emotional well-being. I became more attuned to subtle signals not as paranoia, but as insight. I saw patterns in human behavior more clearly, understood the consequences of secrecy, and appreciated the need for honesty in fostering connection. The lessons applied not just to my marriage, but to all areas of life. Awareness, patience, and careful judgment became my guideposts, ensuring that I would navigate future relationships with wisdom and caution. I also learned the quiet power of strategy over impulsivity. Responding intelligently, rather than reacting in anger, proved more effective and sustainable. I realized that patience, observation, and subtle action could restore balance without harm or drama. The satisfaction that came from reclaiming agency was lasting because it relied on thoughtfulness rather than emotion. This reinforced a larger truth, that strength often lies in restraint, clarity, and measured action. The experience showed me that even when betrayal occurs, the response defines the outcome more than the initial act itself. As time passed, the pain softened, leaving a deepened sense of resilience. I understood that betrayal could not erase who I was or my capacity to act wisely. The awareness of what had been hidden no longer chained me to anger or despair. Instead, it became a reference point, a reminder that careful observation and intelligent responses could maintain balance and agency. I carried this awareness forward, integrating the lessons into daily life and ensuring that trust and boundaries would be honored more consciously, and that my own sense of self remained intact. Finally, I felt a sense of closure that was earned, not forced. The betrayal, the revelations, the subtle strategies of observation and response, they had reshaped me, but they had also strengthened me. I had learned to navigate complexity, reclaim personal power, and move forward with patience and clarity. Life continued, inevitably imperfect, but my capacity to act wisely, to observe carefully, and to maintain emotional agency remained intact. I carried these lessons forward, grounded in the understanding that betrayal does not define the victim. It defines the choices that follow, and the strength cultivated along the way. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or discovered a hidden truth, you know how deeply it can shake you. I want to hear your story. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your courage and perspective could help someone else who's going through the same pain. And if you want more real-life stories of secrets, discovery, and quiet revenge, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, we dive into true stories that will make you feel, think, and never forget the lessons of trust and resilience.